Okay, I mentioned in the last couple of presentations that what you have now in basically the Middle East, West Asia, is you have the fact that the balance of power, if you would, in terms of money, resources, et cetera, has been entirely skewed to the countries that basically in the southern part of what's usually called the Middle East. This is because they have oil. Now, there's two things to remember about the oil. One is, most importantly, oil is a non-renewable resource. So every gallon of oil that Saudi Arabia, for example, pumps out of the ground is one less gallon of oil. It's not going to replace itself. And because they've been the world's major supplier of petroleum for going on over a century, they're running out of oil. They're not. It's estimated that the reserves that you see in this part of the Middle East are good for maybe another 10 or 15 years, less if they keep on pumping them, because they're pumping them out in ever greater amounts. Because as China and India move into the higher economic market and there's more cars, et cetera, the actual demand for oil in all its forms is actually radically increasing. Because you have to remember, everything like plastic is made from oil too. So much as these countries would like to sort of limit the amount that they bleed out, if you want to think of it that way, because it's a limited resource, it's non-renewable. On the other hand, because they've been doing it for about a century, most of them have become very comfortable with spending the money. My analogy for this particular group, this would be Saudis, Dubai, et cetera, is that this particular region is sort of like a group of people that won the lottery. They were in an area that really had no impact. They had no leverage. The leverage was all to the north or to the west: Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Syria, et cetera, Turkey. And so when oil suddenly becomes a commodity, and they've got, at least initially, almost a big chunk of the world's market, along with the United States, for oil production, then all of a sudden they literally have won a lottery. In fact, oftentimes when they talk about places where you can find oil, they talk about the oil lottery, in the sense that all of a sudden, bawang, and you've got access to this huge amount of money. But when you think about it, the analogy is not a bad one, because a lottery is something you win once. So if you win, $1 million lottery, bang, you won $1 million, and that's it. You don't get like $1 million every year. The same with oil. You made maybe billions of dollars because you've got oil, but you've only got a limited amount of oil, and the more that you pump, which is what you sell to generate the revenue, the less you've got left for next month, next year, 10 years down the road. And so the problem that these countries are getting into, especially Saudi Arabia, is that they're running out of oil. And because they'd had it for about a century, and because, like the lottery, you don't really have to think about it because it just sort of was there, it's on your landscape. So the end result of all this was that they really did an absolutely terrible job in terms of figuring out how to wisely spend it. Now, you have to remember, in some cases, it really isn't their fault. From basically the turn of the century right into the post-World War II period, these places were really, really independent. They were, for all intents and purposes, colonies. The British controlled almost all oil production out of what's now Saudi Arabia, for example. So they really didn't have control over that. But having said that, a huge proportion of the oil that gets pumped out is post-World War II. So for this particular region, for the southern part of the Middle East, you could sort of lay the blame at their own door, in the sense that they had all this money coming in. This is the classic examples of excess that you see that people always talk about. Saudi princes having their own airplanes, having gold-plated cars, and all this type of stuff. And when you think about it, what the hell? Why not? You've got all this money coming in, you might as well spend it. What are you going to do? Sleep on it? So on one hand, that's the logic. On the other hand, because you didn't do anything to work for the money, to sound rather Calvinist, you don't really have any sense of, if you would, ownership over the resource. It's just, it was there. You're lucky enough to be sitting on top of it, so bang, it's your money. So there really, at some point, there almost becomes an idea that this is going to go on forever. The United States has this to a huge extent too. We're always going to be wealthy. We're always going to be powerful. But in this particular region, you never had that. You always were marginal, and all of a sudden now you're the big players. And because of ego, ethnic identity, religion, politics, in the sense of nation states and such like that, what you get is these countries aren't willing to just be successful local players. They want to be regional or global players, because they've got the money to do so. But but there's not a lot of thought put into the fact that that money's temporary and it's now rapidly disappearing. So what you find is there's been some really interesting attempts in the last 10 years or so in this region, especially Saudi Arabia, to try to figure out what do you do post oil? How do you stay a regional player at least, or someone that's successful and important? And to a certain extent, if you're the Saud family, how does the Saud family stay in charge of Saudi Arabia when there's no oil anymore? Because you have to remember, a large part of the population in these countries basically gets, their lifestyle is subsidized by basically oil. There's free education, free this, free that. They're, the pay scale for their jobs is really complete out of relationship to the countries around them. So it's fantastic. I mean, they've got a great deal, but that great deal is eventually pretty soon going to come to a screeching halt. And what do you do to replace it? And that's a discussion that they're having, but they're not really doing it. They're having a really hard time having the discussion, because to a certain extent in all this region, what you find is the families or the groups that are in charge, and most of them are sort of semi-constitutional monarchies like the Sauds. They've come to power and people are willing to leave them in power because they get the checks in the mail. So if all of a sudden the ruling family says, well, hold on, folks, we're going to have to rethink how we spend our money because we got to be a little more, rational about it, a little more responsible about it, then people are going to look and say, well, what the hell, dude? Why should you remain in charge? I want the good times to continue, and bonk, and that family's going to go out and replace something else. So what you find is your political elites in this region are really on a knife edge in terms of how they stay in power and what they do about the decreasing amount of resource available to them. In other words, their money generator. Now, the other problem that you see in this particular region sort of plays out in two ways. In this particular region, Kuwait's probably the most famous, but this is also true of, the Emirates and other places like that, is that a huge proportion of the actual working population, since there's very small populations here, this was pastoral nomadic desert groups. So there are very few people per square meter or kilometer, for example, from the region. So what happened when all of a sudden they become successful, and Dubai is a classic case in point, is that to build the high rises, to act as storekeepers, to act as folks, as the wait staff, for example, in a restaurant or a hotel, you're not going to find folks from Dubai that are going to do that because they're part of the oil money. So what you do is you import labor. Smallest group is Koreans. The vast majority are Filipinos, Indonesians, Thai. And this first came really visible to the rest of the world when Kuwait was invaded by Iraq back in 2000 or whatever it was. And all of a sudden people realized there were 100,000, 200, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of foreign laborers in Kuwait that suddenly found themselves trapped in this war. They didn't have anything to do with it. They were just, there, running a front counter at a hotel or something. And then people started to actually look at this and realize that what you had was this, basically your entire almost, maybe 40 to 50% of your labor pool, in the sense the people that do the work, the maids in homes, the people doing the cleaning, all this type of stuff, to an enormous extent was done by imported labor. Now, to a certain extent, they're more liable to use Indonesian labor simply because Indonesians, though they don't speak English, which is generally lingua franca for this region, they are Muslim. Filipinos, Koreans, Thai, that's a little more sketchy because they're different religious systems, and these are areas where religion is dominant. But the key thing with this labor groups is they're terribly exploited. They're on short-term contracts. If you get injured, they just send you home. If they decide they don't like who you are, you just get sent home. There's all sorts of abuses that go on. What happens to people over there? So they're seen as basically disposable people in these countries. And the problem you get into is, well, if you're going to go to a lifestyle that's post-oil, you're not going to have any money to pay these people. So then folks in Dubai, for example, find out that they're going to have to be the ones, doing the garbage services. They're going to have to be the ones serving people in a restaurant, and that's not going to happen. So the enormous in-migration of labor, which is an enormous part, especially of their service sector, which is almost entirely foreigners, is a huge issue in this. Now you have to remember that's the southern part. When you get into the rest of this region, whether it be the northern part of the Middle East, in fact, let me segue over to the map here. Come on. I think that showed up. When you segue over to the map, and so we're looking at the map now, hopefully, in that situation, what you find is the countries here: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey. Well, Syria right now, not so much. Lebanon, Turkey, and certainly in the countries in the northern part of North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, etc. What you find here is you've got this enormous population of people under the age of 30. These folks, if you look at population pyramids, these guys look like this. And they got a huge population of young people. Now, the problem that they've got, unlike the oil countries down here, is they don't have oil. They don't have money coming in. So for much of this region, I believe, I'm not sure what it is right now, you'd have to go Google it, but Egypt usually has, in the last 10 years, has an unemployment rate of about 30 to 40% if you're under 30 years of age. So the group, maybe between like 18 to 30, almost half of them are unemployed. This is certainly, it was even worse in Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. And it's also true in Iraq and Iran. A huge proportion of population of younger folks that would be, the folks that are starting jobs and starting careers and stuff like that, they're totally out of the loop. And they're a huge proportion of the total population. So what you've got, ironically, in a lot of this region is a ton of people looking for work. When you get down here, what you've got is very few people, and they're actually importing people from other countries to do the work for them. So it's yet another discrepancy. And one of the huge political issues for the rest of this region, from Iran west on the northern section, middle part of this belt, is that what do you do when you've got a huge proportion of your population that's 30 years of age or so, and they've never had a job? It's not necessarily that they don't want a job, but there's just no jobs available, and even more importantly, there's no attractive jobs available, and they're just not interested in that. Now, this is where your religious fundamentalism comes in, because then what you've got is a large population that is young. They think that they should have some say in the world going on around them, which they don't. They're not generating any revenue, and so if someone's got a message for them, they're going to jump right on the bandwagon because what the hell, they've got nothing else to do. So it's important to remember in this region that one of the main problems that you get into is the fact that you've got a huge percentage of the population of younger folks who do not have jobs, who have no access to a potential career, and really don't see their life as going anywhere. So that makes them very vulnerable to people with a very attractive message. They're not going to think through whether, wait, does this make sense or not? Which is reasons like groups like ISIS can be so powerful in this region. And the vast majority of people in ISIS are, under 30. So what you get in this region is a huge proportion of folks that are unemployed that want to be somebody. Down here, what you've got is a huge proportion of your population has access to resources, literally like money growing on trees. And so the relationship they have with their governments and stuff is very stressful. The relationship with their governments up here is very bad because the younger population is like, well, dude, if you're in charge, if you're the president of Algeria, then how the hell come, why don't I have a job? Why aren't there any careers available? Why not this? Why not that? And so what you find is your elites in this region are on very shaky ground because they don't really have an answer for sort of major demographic, social, economic issues that they've got dealing with, which is one reason why it's fine to pick a war with someone else, because then people will be distracted. And that would certainly be one of the reasons Abad was going after other groups in Syria, is just simply the fact that Syria's got a huge proportion of the population under 30. They have no idea what they're going to do with them. And so you basically start picking a fight, and one that, sort of in a rude way, one that kills some of them. But even more importantly, you can then blame everything on someone else. You can blame it on Turkey or the Americans or Iraq or whoever. And at that point, no one's going to ask the rude question, well, why didn't you do something? So, well, so-and-so's wrong. And down here, of course, you've got a different situation. There's very little public support for the ruling elites in this region, simply because, people that are, pretty smart are going to be thinking, well, this ain't going to last forever. And they don't see any plan in place that's going to allow them to keep a very high-end lifestyle without the resources that made that lifestyle possible. So it'd be like having won the lottery and you blew through, 900,000 to $1 million. And you're 30 years old and you got 100,000 left for the rest of your life. And you haven't had to work for the last 5 or 6 years. You've had a really good time spending the money, going places, basically being on a perpetual 3-year vacation. And all of a sudden you're supposed to sit down and go back to being a regular person with a job. And you're sort of like, dude, that's really unattractive. Never mind the fact that, in the 3 years prior, if you'd been a little less cavalier about blowing the cash, you'd still have more, but people are people. So this particular region is fraught with all sorts of difficulties. Um, some external, some self-induced, and at some point were self-inflicted, and at some point now it's almost impossible to sort them out. But this is one reason why you see so much conflict in the region. You have a very strong sense of ethnic identity. Ethnic identity is oftentimes tied to some particular branch of a religion, especially in Islam, also Judaism. And in that situation, what you then have is a large part of the population is dissatisfied with the situation, and it just blows up constantly. Egypt's been like watching popcorn go off in the last 10 years because of this. So that's this particular region. Very, very complicated. And if someone says they've got a solution for it, I wish them a lot of luck, because I don't see how you're going to have solutions to something like this in the short term. One of the ways you'd have to do it is by providing career and potential futures to your population, your younger population, because it's not happening. That just shuts everything else